Hello and welcome to this presentation on the contrast essay, the second essay of the semester. In this presentation, we will cover how to develop a contrast essay, how to organize it, how to think about doing a contrast, and then near the end, we will cover the instructions for the essay that I'm asking you to write for next week. Okay, first off, there are two ways of developing a contrast essay, and I only want you to use one, but I do feel obliged that I need to at least touch upon both types. So, the one that I want you to use is called point by point. You compare or contrast, in this case you'll be contrasting both subjects first on one point and then on the next point and so on. So you're going to have 3 points that you're contrasting your two subjects, and then each body will focus on the differences between the subjects based upon that one point. We'll get into that more detail later. Pattern 2 is the block style. I do not allow block style essays because I do not think they're very effective. But in block style, you would spend half the essay discussing subject A on all the points and then subject B on the same points. Notice what's common about both of these is the issue of points. It seems to me, and this is the reason why I have you actually use point by point contrast, is that the focal point is the points. So, and again, you'll see that in a little bit. So right now, what you need to take away from this particular slide is that you'll be using what's called point by point contrast. The first order of business in writing a contrast essay, before you even begin writing, is to identify two subjects that you will be contrasting. Though you are going to be focusing on different characteristics, you have to be sure that the two subjects that you've selected are related in some way. Otherwise, you will not write an effective contrast essay. Consider the next two slides to help you understand why you've got to choose two subjects that are in some ways similar to each other. So here are two possible subjects for a contrast essay. They look different enough. A 12-year-old boy and a chair. Can you effectively and productively write an essay in which you can distinguish the two of them? Well, the answer is no, you can't, because they are too different. They are different, yes, and I know that you're thinking, well, a contrast essay is supposed to identify differences, and that is true. However, notice that there's not much to compare here or to contrast. It's going to be very difficult to write any kind of productive essay. A chair is made of wood. In this case here, the boy is made of flesh. That's not very conducive to developing an informative essay. And remember, here's the thing you have to remember: the idea of the contrast essay is to put two subjects into relation with each other in order to learn more about them. You're not really going to learn more about a child and a chair if you put them into contrast. It would be more effective to put into contrast two subjects that are that have some similar characteristics, and that's what we're about to look at right now. Now here are two other subjects, and let's determine whether or not you can effectively contrast these two. An apple and an orange. You've all heard the common expression, it's like comparing apples and oranges. The expression is supposed to indicate that the two objects, the apple and the orange, are so different that there's no way to even identify any kind of common characteristics. That, of course, is a lie. For example, they're both fruits. And if they're both classified in the same botanical category, that means they've got a lot in common. And so, despite the fact that they're different, there is enough commonality, unlike the boy in the chair, to be able to really examine how they're different. And this is the irony of the contrast essay. In order to be able to identify how two subjects are different from each other in a productive way, you first have to find out how they're alike. Every essay that you write this semester is going to have some key characteristic of it, some term or phrase that is going to be essential for you to understand in order for you to effectively write the essay. And in this case, it's points of contrast. After identifying your subjects, you will need to identify 3 points of contrast. Now, points of contrast are elements or traits that the two subjects have in common, but have, of course that's in quotes, differently. In other words, both subjects have these elements, but the elements vary from subject to subject. Consider the apple and the orange. Because both fruits, they have, as we've talked about, common traits. But because they are different fruits, the traits have different characteristics, or what I later call distinguishing characteristics. And we're going to go through in detail, looking at the apple and the orange, identifying the points of contrast, in other words, the general characteristics they have in common, and then find out how to distinguish the differences between these common characteristics based upon the differences between them. Okay, so let's look at one of the first common characteristics between the apple and the orange. This will be our first point of contrast, and that would be skin. They both have skin. They're covered. So you can see that the orange has skin, but the skin is different in other characteristics. That is what I mean when I say that a point of contrast is an element or trait that both subjects have, but have differently. We come to the second point of contrast, and that would be the meat. Now, again, you can see that both the apple and the orange have meat. And understand, I know some of you might be saying, well, meat is what you eat when you're eating a steak or chicken, etc. But meat is actually the technical term for the edible flesh of any fruit, vegetable, or animal. But to go back to our apple and orange, they both have meat, and this is what you eat or juice or whatever. But the meat of each is different in color, in composition, and other characteristics. Not to belabor the point, though I'm about to do that in the next slide, this is what I mean when I say that a point of contrast is an element or trait that both subjects have but have differently. Since you are assigned to write a 5-paragraph essay with 3 body paragraphs, meaning that you need 3 points of contrast, though there are ways to contrast the apple and such as relative health value, things of nutritional value, things of that nature, I'm going to limit my analysis to the third obvious similarity that is, of course, different, and that would be the seeds. As you can see, both the apple and the orange have seeds, but the seed of each is different in color, shape, texture, location, and other characteristics. Now, as I have written here, I'm sure you'll be happy when I tell you that I'm saying this for the last time. I think I am. A point of contrast is an element or trait that both subjects have, but have differently. Once you have identified the points of contrast, now you can get down to the business of actually doing the contrasting. And what you want to find are what are called distinguishing characteristics. And as the term implies, distinguishing characteristics are characteristics that distinguish something, a subject, from another. In a contrast essay, the distinguishing characteristics make up of the body paragraphs. Now, as you will see in upcoming slides, the points of contrast make up the topics of the body paragraphs, because you're doing point by point and not subject by subject. So let's continue using the apple and the orange and see how to do this. Well, for purposes of this lecture, I have limited the distinguishing characteristics that I'm discussing. When in my face-to-face classes, I usually allow the students to come up with these distinguishing characteristics, and often I am surprised at what they know the differences between the points of contrast about an apple and an orange. So in this case here, obviously we're talking about skin, and so let's say the apple, of course, is red or green or yellow or pied, which means having two or more colors. You see this in Macintosh apples and other apples of that sort. The skin is smooth and the skin is thin. Now, with an orange, you want to find, and this is very important, you want to make sure that you have distinguishing characteristics that match the ones before. So, in the case of red or green or yellow or pied, we're talking about color. So there needs to be a distinguishing characteristic of color with the orange, and that's pretty simple. It's orange. Since we're talking texture of the apple skin, saying that it's smooth, then responding analysis of the texture of the orange, and so it's rough or bumpy. And then, since we said that the apple skin was thin, then we are obliged to say that the orange skin is thick. Same thing with meat. The apple, clearly the colors are white for the apple and orange for the orange skin. What is more important in terms of the meat is the homogeneous versus heterogeneous characteristics of the meat. Homogeneous, as you can see here, means consisting of parts all of the same kind, and in fact, when you look at the meat of the apple, all of the parts are identical. With the orange skin, of course, you're dealing with something that is heterogeneous, because it's diverse in character. It is different. There are wedges, there's pulp, there's juice, there's a variety of different elements that contribute or make up the meat of the orange, and obviously that is something that you would want to deal with. And then finally, with the seeds, things like shape, for example, teardrop shaped, and texture, smooth, and color, brown. With the orange, the shape is oval, although some of the pictures I've looked at of the orange seed indicate otherwise, but I'm still going to go with oval. If you feel a dry seed, and you have to remember these seeds have to be dry in order for you to understand the texture of them, the apples, the orange, and of course the color is white. So these would be the characteristics that distinguish the key traits of the apple and the orange that we identified in the section on points of contrast. Now, with any contrast essay, it is important to develop some kind of chart, so that way you have an easy access to the points of contrast and the distinguishing characteristics, and that's what I've provided for you right here. So you can see skin, and of course it's red or green or yellow or pied. It's smooth, thin for the apple. The same thing with the orange. It's orange, it's rough or bumpy, and it's thick, and on down the line, just what we covered. What this does, though, is it makes it easier for you to organize your essay. We'll talk about organization here in a little bit. But if you are going to write a point-by-point essay about the differences between the apple and the orange, then if you've chosen skin, meat, and seeds as your points of contrast, then obviously, as we'll see, like I said, in a moment here, the information in the second and third columns will be your supporting details. Now, once you've established this chart, it becomes very easy for you to use it to construct your essay. So you'll know with points of contrast, the topic sentences, and I'll explain that more in a moment, the topic sentences will identify the key elements of the skin in one paragraph, the meat in another paragraph, and the seeds in a final body paragraph. And so in paragraph 1, everything that you're going to write is going to be about the red. Everything in the paragraph 1 is going to be about the skin of the apple and the orange. In paragraph 2, it's going to be about the meat of the apple and the orange and its differences. And then finally, in paragraph 3, in this case here, it's going to be the differences in the seeds of the apple and the orange. Now, we will talk in the next slide about how to actually construct the essay using the point-by-point contrast structure. Okay, so here is a schematic, I suppose you can call it, of the essay organization. As you can see, of course, the first paragraph is going to be the introduction, which provides the background information and includes the last paragraph is going to be, and it'll provide the takeaway information or the context or combination thereof. Now, we've organized in the previous chart the arrangement of the paragraphs, making the skin first, then the meat, and then the seeds. And so what we have here is how you arrange it. The first two black rows represent the two parts of the first paragraph. As you can see, body paragraph 1A and then 1B. In 1A, you're going to have a topic sentence that would introduce the subject of the first part of the paragraph, in this case, the apple skin, and then, of course, provide the supporting details, a description of the apple skin. The following part of the paragraph, the second half, I should say, is going to focus on the details of the orange skin. Please note that when you introduce the second topic sentence, which will introduce the second subject, you need to use a transitional expression. Okay, and I will talk more about transitional expressions in a couple of slides. So all of your paragraphs will work like that. Do not jump back and forth between some characteristic of the apple skin and then some characteristic of the orange skin and then back and forth, orange and apple, because it's too confusing to the reader. So divide all of your paragraphs in half. The first half will be apple skin, the second half orange skin. The same thing with the second body paragraph. The first half will be apple meat, the second half will be orange meat, with a transition and, of course, introductory topic sentences for each different subject. And the same thing is true of the third paragraph. Now, granted, you are not going to be writing about apples and oranges, but I'm using this as the metaphor because I'll write your actual essays. So let's proceed to dealing with problems to avoid. The first and most important problem to avoid in a contrast essay is the so-called so what thesis. In other words, a thesis statement that when the reader reads it says, so what? So for example, a thesis statement that would say, apples are different than oranges is very engaging. There has to be a purpose to in other words, you want to use the contrast to demonstrate a larger point. The good news is, when we look at the assignment itself, you see that is built into the assignment. Another important thing to remember in a contrast essay, along with all essays, is to make sure that you describe your subjects clearly and distinctly. The only way to convince your reader of the validity of your contrast is to show the differences clearly and distinctly. Your details must support the reason you are showing the differences in this first place. The next problem to avoid is avoiding a choppy essay. This is one of the tricky aspects to the construction of a contrast essay, because with normal essays you usually have a single subject, and in this case you have two. And so, because as we saw a few slides ago, you're going to be shifting between one subject and another over the course of 3 paragraphs, you are going to indicate these shifts to the reader. So, though you are not writing an essay, I have provided you with certain words that serve as a signal to indicate that you're creating or moving from one likeness to another. However, you want to concentrate on the section on contrast. So words like however, on the contrary, on the other hand, in contrast, and although, these words show or indicate to the reader what to expect is coming up. So when you move from, let's say, to go back to our sample essay, you move from the apple seeds to the orange seeds, you need to let the reader know you're changing your focus. So, on the other hand, orange seeds are blank. Okay, so using the on the other hand is essential when moving from one subject to another within a paragraph. The final problem to avoid is something you won't find in our textbook, or as far as I know any textbook, because it's something that I made up. But I call it the not-er fallacy. And let me go over it very quickly. The purpose of contrasting two subjects is to allow the reader to learn about both through identifying differences in characteristics. The reader must learn about both subjects. Therefore, you cannot say that one subject has a quality and the other subject does not, i.e., an orange has vitamin C but an apple does not, because in this case here, you learn something about the orange but you learn nothing about the apple. That is the not part of the not-er fallacy. The part is as follows. Similarly, you can't say one subject simply has more or less of a characteristic that both subjects share, i.e., an apple is juicy, but an orange is juicier. All right. In the first case, the reader only learns about one subject and not the other. In the second case, the juicier, the reader learns that both subjects share the same characteristic and vary only in degree, which is contrary to the purpose of a contrast essay. So remember, you're looking for contrasting characteristics, not greater or less than, or has and does not have. All right, and now it's time to discuss your assignment. Your assignment is as follows. You will write a contrast essay in which you examine two restaurants of a similar style for the purpose of recommending one over the other. So in some ways it is kind of like a review, but you are trying to contrast, you're trying to find key points of a restaurant and then contrasting the two. It is important that you choose restaurant style. For example, Popeyes and McDonald's are both fast food, whereas Chili's and I don't know, Applebee's are not fast food. They are restaurants where you're waited on. So you need to choose two of the same type of restaurants to contrast. As usual, the length is 2 to 3 pages and 5 paragraphs. The formatting, of course, as always, typed in 12-point Times New Roman font, and the style is MLA style, which at this point I think you're all pretty well familiar with. Okay, the introduction, as usual, is going to provide background information. So in the case of the two restaurants, it's going to provide me with information such as type of food it serves, location of each restaurant, etc. In other words, give me the information necessary to know that if you do recommend one restaurant over the other, I'll be able to find it, and if you and find it when it's open. And if you don't recommend a restaurant, make sure that I know where it is so I don't go there. The thesis statement at the end of the introduction will, of course, without telegraphing, right? Not saying in this paper I will, or etc. Make a statement about the quality difference between the two subjects you are contrasting. Your thesis should also communicate the purpose of your essay. In other words, you need to state a preference for one of the subjects. You will need to include your 3 points of contrast as well, and I have an example of that at the end of this presentation. As we've talked about, the body of your essay is going to be 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph is going to focus on a specific point of contrast, which we've covered. Remember that you're trying to demonstrate the quality of the different restaurants, so the details that you provide should demonstrate clearly how, in this particular point of contrast, one restaurant is clearly better than the other. Okay, make sure to avoid the not-er fallacy. And make sure that you are very clear and objective in the way you present your details. One thing to avoid, I might add, you are writing about a restaurant, so I do not want to hear anything about best food in the world, most fantastic steak, any of these things. You could say good, you could say good quality, you could say delicious, that's fine, but you cannot use exaggerated descriptors to describe the food or anything else about the place. One note about describing food. Okay, you're not going to be able to describe exactly how the food tastes, and you're not going to be able to describe everything on a particular menu. So you make a quality statement about the food at a particular restaurant, and then give me a general sense of what's on the menu without exhausting me with listing every single thing, and then select 1 or 2 items that you find especially good and describe them. And by describing, you'll be describing things like crunchiness, richness, different flavors that might be in the foods, things like that. Remember that your topic sentences or your paragraphs are going to have 2 topic sentences in each paragraph. You're going to say, for example, the service at blank is good or attentive. Then you're going to provide me with the description of the service in that particular restaurant. Okay, and then using a transitional expression, you move on to the second topic sentence, such as, on the other hand, the service at blank, whatever restaurant that would be, is poor or unattentive, or whatever you want to describe it. Then again, the details will support the judgment you've made in the topic sentence. Again, to repeat, the supporting details are going to be clear and specific details that illustrate, allow the reader to see the relevant differences of the 2 restaurants that you are contrasting. One thing to remember, for example, I have this at the bottom here. If you are writing about how one restaurant staff is superior to the others, you would need to provide examples of the staff's behavior. So you need to tell me what the staff does. Don't simply describe it. Don't say they're friendly. Say they greet you with a smile and introduce themselves by name. If they're not friendly, don't say they're not friendly. That's the not-er. Say that they're rude, or they ignore customers, or they leave customers to, they let the drinks run out on the table without offering any refills. These are examples of bad service. So things of action. Again, things to remember. Organize your body paragraph in order of importance or logical order. So if you view food as the most important point of contrast, then say a food paragraph for the end of your essay. Remember to use point-by-point style, which we've covered fairly extensively. Remember to use transitions when you shift subjects. If you have any questions about general paragraph construction or essay construction, refer to the diagram of a 5-paragraph essay, but I don't think you're going to need to do that. And then finally, this is very important. You're going to have some hard time with this. Do not use I or you or we. Okay? You describe them as an observer, not as though you were a participant in the restaurant. This is a diagram that's taken on a topic outline for a contrast essay that comes from the book, so you probably have already looked at it. Basically, one of the nice things about choosing this particular topic here is that it gives you ready-made points of contrast. I think we would all agree the most important elements in any restaurant are food, service, and atmosphere. And so it's these qualities, these points of contrast, that we judge restaurants by. So you're going to choose a restaurant that has better food than the other. You're going to choose a restaurant or prefer a restaurant that has better service than the other, and you're going to prefer a restaurant that has better atmosphere than the other. Okay, notice too, by the way, the way the thesis restaurant should, or thesis restaurant, the way the thesis should be presented is very simple. Is a better restaurant or better family restaurant than McPhoney's because of its superior food, atmosphere, and service. So this thesis does what I'm looking for. It in the two subjects says which one is better and gives the reasons why, which are of course the points of contrast. A final word, please remember to examine your restaurants objectively. Okay? Do not use any kind of name calling. Do not say that things are terrible or any kind of inflammatory language. You want the reader to, the way the reader is going to trust you is if you sound like a reasonable and good judge of your subjects. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation, and I wish you all good luck.